That graph makes me sick. Look at this shit. Henderson poverty line, relative poverty line, unemployment benefit, coronavirus supplement, ping, and end of the pandemic, ping. Oh my God. Anyway, the Reserve Bank wants more unemployment. It should be applauded for admitting it. The title is apparently clickbait. Apparently the article is a little better. Let's find out, shall we? The Reserve Bank should be praised for speaking frankly. Last week, Deputy Governor Michael Bullock said the RBA's goal was to get the unemployment rate up to 4.5% by the end of next year. It's currently at 3.6%. We need to fire some people because there's not enough pause. She said there's too much employment for the economy to handle right now, and if there was more unemployed people, it would help bring inflation under control. She was castigated on social media for her comments, but I think she should be applauded. It was great to hear a senior official using plain English to explain how policymakers actually manage our economy. They've been using unemployment as a tool to manage inflation for decades, but when have you heard them say so? So speaking openly about it, it means we can finally start to have a national conversation. Are we all happy with this system? Oh, okay, I see where this article is going. Oh my God, I see where this article is going. Oh my God, Pog, could we be a little bit excited? Could we be excited? Wait, hold. Are they actually going to critique the fucked up system that is capitalism that relies on a certain amount of people being unemployed and poor in order to function? Gasp, maybe? Huh? What? Hold? What did full employment used to mean? What we're talking about here is the concept of full employment. Its definition has changed over time, and each definition has had different economic outcomes and consequences. In the early 1940s, the British economist William Beveridge, in his landmark work, Full Employment in a Free Society, 1944, said a genuinely full employment economy would have slightly more jobs available than unemployed people to fill them. He estimated it would correspond to an unemployment rate of no more than 3%. He said if the labor market was that tight, it would likely become a seller's market rather than a buyer's market, meaning it would slightly favor workers because workers are the sellers of labor. As he said, there was a really important reason why labor markets should favor workers. Why? Because if an employer struggles to find workers, it can be a huge inconvenience. But if an unemployed person struggles to find work, it can destroy their life. Difficulty in selling labor has consequences of a different order of harmfulness from those associated with difficulty in buying labor, he wrote. A person who has difficulty in buying the labor that he wants suffers inconveniences or a reduction of profits. A person who cannot sell his labor is in effect told that he is of no use. The first difficulty causes annoyance or loss. The other is a personal catastrophe. The human difference between failing to buy and failing to sell labor is the decisive reason for aiming to make the labor market a seller's rather than a buyer's market, he wrote. He said full employment meant a few other things too. It meant jobs should pay fair wages. Cool, and that's been going so well for all of us. And so be so located that unemployed people could reasonably be expected to take them. And it should never take anyone so long to find a job that it started to demoralize them. Wow, the system's working so well then, isn't it? Clearly. Has anybody else ever taken so long to find a job that it has demoralized them? Because I certainly have. Because it's certainly fucking happened to me. And I am skilled, sort of. So genuine full employment had quantitative and qualitative aspects, according to Mr. Beveridge. But here's a question. How can you have more job vacancies than unemployed people to fill them and still have an unemployment rate of 3%? Well, check the graph below. There were 5,000 more job vacancies than official job seekers in the September quarter 2022. Australia's labour market actually experienced that situation in the September quarter last year. at the peak of our post-lockdown labor market tightness, where we briefly had 5,000 more job vacancies than official job seekers. Our unemployment rate was 3.5% at the time. In fact, our unemployment rate hit 3.5% in August, and it's been sitting at 3.5% for the past 10 months, which makes it look like it's close to a floor of some kind. In September, that 3.5% unemployment rate obviously accounted for some frictional and seasonal unemployment, which you can't avoid. But did it also reflect some involuntary unemployment? According to the Bureau of Statistics, there were still 110,000 long-term unemployed people in the September quarter, which means people who've been unemployed for a year or more but still haven't found work. Okay, but let's talk about this a little bit, right? Because it is incredibly difficult to get off financial support from the government. Because what you get from the government is reduced every time you get a job. And it is very hard to go from benefits to getting a job and working enough and having enough money. It's incredibly difficult. Chat. Oh, I just want some juice and I can do this. Now, I'm not going to use my specific tool for this because this one is more of a knifey situation. Ready? You just got to pop it. Bam. It's popped. We're in the clear now. You ready for this? Oh my God, that was so hard to open. Much easier. It's not really cold anymore though, so that's a bit sad, but never mind. No man to open juice? No, I've got really big muscles. There's a line though. That counts. That counts. It's big. Nobody look. They haven't changed in years. Leave me alone. How many were demoralized about their unforgiving job search in September? And of the people who were employed in the September quarter, 813,000 were still considered underemployed because they couldn't get the hours they wanted. We have a lot of work to do before that situation could satisfy the definition of full employment proposed by Mr. Beveridge. How did it go in practice? At any rate, Mr. Beveridge said his guess that full employment would correspond to an average unemployment rate of 3% was actually a conservative estimate. He thought Britain's labour markets could probably sustain a much lower unemployment rate than that. When the famous economist John Maynard, this word, Keynesian economics chat, we're here. Keynesian economics, great. He wrote to Mr. Beveridge, no harm in aiming at 3% unemployment, but I shall be surprised if we succeed. And what happened? Britain's political leaders went for full employment and they ended up surprising themselves. In the 12 years from 1948 to 1959, their labour markets recorded an average unemployment rate of 1.5%. The same thing happened in Australia. Australian policymakers have been inspired by the new theory of full employment, and it led to the Labor government's 1945 white paper on full employment. Nugget Coombs, one of Australia's most influential public servants, okay, I'm sorry. I wish my first name was Nugget. What a great first name. What? What a great first name. It was a key architect of the policy. In 1944, he gave one of the first public explanations on what full employment might look like in Australia in a speech titled Problems of a High Employment Economy. He defined full employment on similar terms as Beveridge. He said it would mean a high and stable level of employment with a few more jobs available than men and women to fill them. He thought it would tend to a slight but persistent shortage of labour, but with something like a 4% unemployment rate for men and a 2% for women. Interesting. As it turned out, when full employment became official policy in Australia, the unemployment rate quickly fell to 1.2% in 1947 and 0.9% in 1948, and it averaged less than 2% all the way up until the early 1970s. You can see that full employment era in the graph below. Man, the boomers fucking, God, man. Now that concept of full employment was contested from the beginning. And Keynes, how do I pronounce this? Keynes? I know it's Keynesian. Keynes, yeah. Died in 1946, so we'll never know what he thought of post-war policymakers' efforts to keep the unemployment rate below 2%. But in 1950, the Institute of Public Affairs published an article by Friedrich Hayek, the Austrian economist who led the counter-revolution against Keynesian economics, titled Full Employment, Planning and Inflation. Hayek argued that full employment, as it was being practiced in the post-war era, would be unsustainable. In 1951, one of Keynes' disciples, Abba Lerner, then introduced the concept of low full employment, which he contrasted to high full employment, to describe the maximum level of employment he thought could be sustained. In 1968, Milton Friedman, is that the same Friedman who did the retail fucking shit? Oh, fuck me. That's so fucking fucked. The Friedman system that we had to engage in retail made me want to die. I fucking hate this dude. I don't even need to know anything more about him to know that I fucking hate him. Oh, it's when you get a gold star if you reach your selling target. You get a red dot or you get a black dot if you fail. It basically, if you don't sell enough shit, you have to look at how you failed on a piece of paper. And then it's like, it's so fucked. Then in 1975, amidst the breakdown of post-war full employment consensus and the emergence of stagflation, Franco Modigliani and Lucas Papademos introduced their concept of the non-inflationary rate of unemployment. And fast forward to 2023, and officials from Australia's Reserve Bank and Treasury now rely on the concept of non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment to define full employment. They say the modern NERU is the theoretical level of unemployment that's natural for prevailing conditions. Prevailing conditions doing a fuck ton of work there. They say it can change over time as the structure of the economy changes, but if unemployment ever falls too far below it, it will see wages and inflation growing too quickly. This definition of full employment says little about the qualitative aspects of full employment that Mr. Beveridge felt was so important. Do you know what the biggest problem is? That the Liberals didn't address this for 10 years. And the way the Liberals addressed this was we just won't increase wages so no one has any money. Therefore, how can we increase inflation if we don't increase wages? Because we'll keep them poor enough so that they don't spend. Right? Please tell me if I'm getting this wrong, by the way, Chad. And didn't address it in any sort of systemic way, which is the entirely fucked up part. Because there needs to be multiple ways to address this. And so now, like, we've increased wages a tiny little bit, but we still have inflation because of the pandemic, because of greedflation, because of the fucking corporations. And so interest rates have to go ridiculous so that people can't afford their mortgages, so that they stop spending money. It's literally, oh man. According to past estimates, in the wake of the early 1990s recession, Australia's labour market would have been in full employment if the unemployment rate got down to 7%. How does that sound to you? Kind of fucked, to be honest. Frustratingly, estimates of the NERU are notoriously hard to pin down and are often reviewed in hindsight. For example, in 2021, Treasury officials conceded their estimate of the NERU was too conservative in the 5 years leading up to 2020, so we were further away from full employment than officials thought in those years. Oh, interesting. You mean you fucked it? Curious. Even today, The fact that we've had a trend unemployment rate of 3.5% for the past 10 months has prompted officials to again think full employment may have been lower in Australia than they'd been assuming. Which brings us to the final section. You may have noticed that the concept of full employment has evolved dramatically over the past 75 odd years. It's drifted a long way from those Beveridge days. Today, the RBA lifts interest rates to dampen inflation, knowing full well the resulting increase in unemployment is being used to get inflation back down. As Deputy Governor Michelle Bullock said last week in general, full employment refers to a situation in which people who want a job can find one without searching for too long, and when they get the hours they need. But for monetary policy, the RBA's price stability mandate requires a narrower concept of full employment. The narrow path, she said. That is, the RBA knows it can't deliver the more general full employment outcome. It needs to be able to shift unemployment around to keep inflation under control, which begs a question. If economists have known that unemployment has been used as a policy tool to manage inflation in the modern era, why haven't they been publicly campaigning, loudly and as a collective, for governments to treat Australia's unemployed better in recent decades? If we've deliberately had far fewer jobs available than unemployed people, why haven't we seen a huge coordinated campaign from the economists who defend this system to lift the unemployment benefit well above poverty levels and to abolish mutual obligations and for enough housing to be provided for everyone? Interesting. Very good questions. I'd love to know the answers. Interesting. Very interesting questions. Interesting. Instead, they allowed, is that the right word, a situation to develop in which the real value of Australia's unemployment benefit was left to rot by successive governments. See below. That graph makes me sick. Look at this shit. Henderson poverty line, relative poverty line, unemployment benefit. Coronavirus supplement, ping. And end of the pandemic, ping. Oh my God. Those same economists may personally like to see the unemployed treated far better, but the Australian public has never seen them campaign for that as an out and proud collective. What's been stopping them? Is it because it would make inflation management harder if the unemployed had their basic needs met? Would it create too much resentment in Australian society if the unemployed had their basic needs met without suffering? Do you know what? Do you want to know what's really difficult to admit? There is rhetoric in Australia that hates poor people, right? In lots of parts of Australia, we call people on unemployment benefits dole bludgers. The word that is used to describe like people on benefits here, the dole is benefits, and bludgers, it's because of the lazy paws. It's just people who don't want to work, right? Like there are people who don't want to work, right? There are a few of those people. They exist. But the reality is most people on benefits would rather not. They would rather be finding some meaning somewhere, but it's not available to them for whatever reason. Would it increase the bargaining power of the already employed, which is undesirable? Oh my God, giving workers more power? Absolutely not. I think we're ready to have this national conversation, and Miss Bullock should be praised for speaking frankly last week about the link between inflation, monetary policy, and unemployment in the modern era. She believes we're experiencing over full employment at the moment, and the sustainable level of full employment, unemployment is probably around 4.5%. Our goal is to return the labour market back to a level more consistent with full employment. The RBA needs unemployment to rise. No, it's not satire. The article is fine, right? This is how you've got to navigate this conversation when you're publishing on ABC. Right? This is progressive. These are progressive, leftist, questioning capitalism, questioning free market capital, like free markets. These are all the right questions. The reason it has to come back to this is because it's still neoliberal bullshit. But these questions here, these are all very much critiquing the system. The article is not bad. The article is factual. And the reason Miss Bullock is being praised is because at least she's honest. This is, in order for capitalism to function as we want it to, we need more poor people. This was written by Gareth Hutchins, business and economics reporter based in Canberra. Worked for the West Australian and Guardian Australia, the Sydney Morning Herald, and the Age. I would say that getting that article over the line at the ABC might have been a little bit of a challenge, right? Because the ABC cops a lot of shit in Australia for being too progressive. It's not, but the ABC cops a lot of shit for that. Yeah, the ABC is terrified of being economically progressive. Whether we like it or not, there are so many people who want the system to remain in place. And the people who want the system to remain in place are the people in power. It is all sides of government, basically all of the media, anybody at the top with money. Everybody wants the system to remain in place. So sneaking in any fucking little critiques like that where it's like, why aren't economists kind of like saying, maybe we should pay poor people more. Maybe we should actually support the poorest of our society. Maybe we should house the poor. Why are they not saying that? That's the progressive little niggles that get people thinking. There's also a bunch of stupid people who want it to remain too. Yes and no. I would say it's not necessarily stupid people. It's more just people that don't have time to think about it too deeply. / have not taken the time to spend 8 hours a day reading through news articles to learn enough to be able to consume economics, sociology, like just all of it. Like there's just politics. Like there are so many things that you need to know in order to be able to contextualize some of that shit. Like also, I know a lot of people in here probably already know, but there is a difference between unemployment and underemployment, right? And women are commonly underemployed. Like the unemployment rate and the way it's calculated is iffy in itself. Whether it considers underemployment, how it's framing casual workers, what it considers full employment for women versus what it considers full employment for men. Like there's so much that goes into these calculations and these analysis. Yes, exactly. She doesn't love you. And it's the idea that we think rich people are deserving of their money. The idea that rich people are good because they have worked hard, they've got good work ethic and, they're good and they do charity and stuff. So they're good people. Whereas a lot of poor people are framed as druggos or alcoholics because, that's all they want to do. Not that, there are systemic issues that resulted in maybe them, being abused during their childhood or not having access to a decent education. And then, I don't know how you guys experience this, but when you can't find meaning in your life, you look for escapism. I'm assuming if you're on Twitch TV, some of you might have played video games, right? We all do it. But imagine your only access to any sort of escapism is like going down, taking the check that you get from the government because you can't get a job, you don't have an education, you don't even have a car, you don't even have reliable housing. And you're like, where the fuck do I fucking start? And it's all too much, so you go and get a drink. I don't necessarily think that makes you a bad person at all. But society in general are just like, look at those poor people, they're just not trying hard enough. And that's where individualism fucks us. It fucks us as a society. Because if you look at people and you're like, you're the result of your bad decisions, you deserve to be poor. That's so fucked up. Because a lot of people who are rich have privilege that you have never even seen. And some people just get lucky. I got lucky. And I'm not even that privileged. I will never afford a home. And I got lucky. I got lucky because my parents let me leave school in year 10 to be a ballerina, which resulted in all sorts of fucking shit. But I ended up going to uni. Like, there's a whole path of lucky things that happened to me that got me to this point. It's so classist and so ableist. So if there is one thing even thinking back to when I was really poor and how hard it was to survive for me And I had the support of family if I needed. It wasn't a lot, but I could ask my parents for $100 here and there. My parents aren't rich by any means. But if I was $100 short on rent, I had the option to ask my parents. I never really did, but like I had the option to ask my parents. There are a lot of people with no one to ask, no one to help. It begins with educating people about poor people aren't bad people. Rich people aren't necessarily good people. Everybody is trying their best. Everybody is searching for meaning. And all that matters is being kind to the people around you and attempting to understand the systems at play. So not only can you help yourself, but you can lift up the people around you.